Welcome to another episode of Unearthing Cincinnati's Past with the one and only Greg Hand right here on the 3 a.m. Coney. Greg, I will let you start us off.
So, at my age, one of the real pleasures in life is an afternoon nap. And so the story I'm about to tell came from one of these afternoon naps. I woke up one afternoon, and as I woke up, I had this memory. I wasn't sure it was a memory, that I had been to the Western Hills Plaza and looked down a tube at a man who was buried in a coffin filled with snakes. Uh-oh. And so I started researching to see if, in fact, this happened, and discovered, in fact, a pattern of promotional gimmicks during the 1960s that took place in Cincinnati, of people being buried alive in different circumstances. The practice appears to have started out just up the street from where I live, on Ferguson Road near Western Hills High School.
Yeah.
There's a Walmart and a Kroger, and that occupies the site that used to be the Ferguson Hills DriveIn. And in 1960, the Ferguson Hills DriveIn was showing a movie called Premature Burial. This was kind of a big budget horror film. It starred Ray Milland, who had a number of roles in these 1950s, 60s sorts of horror science fiction movies. But it's based on a story by Edgar Allan Poe, and it touches on this primal fear that humans have about being buried before they should be buried, being buried while they're alive. And in fact, it was a fear that led to some very strange behaviors in the burial profession. The undertaking profession back in the day. You know, you would bury people with a string in the coffin, so that if the corpse woke up and realized that they were buried, they could kind of yank on this string, and it would ring a bell that was attached to their tombstone.
And to let you know they were still alive or had become a zombie, and yes, they needed to be let out of the coffin. Yeah, you had touched on that bell on the previous episode. We were talking about grave robbers and body snatchers. You had to pay extra for the bell, right?
You had to pay extra for the bell, and the thing is I've never found a report that somebody actually did ring the bell. I've found lots of reports of people buried with the string, but I haven't found any that were buried and actually used it. And another thing that they would do is they would leave you in a pre-burial sort of waiting room. You know, you'd have your visitation and all that, and then they'd move the coffin into this other room, and they wouldn't bury you until you started smelling up the place. You know, and so that
then they knew.
The sign that, you're not going to come around. You're not going to revive from this.
All right, this one's actually dead. We can bury this one.
This one's actually dead. We're past due. We're going
past due.
We're going to bury this person. And so this was what the movie was about. And the Edgar Allan Poe short story was somebody who was buried prematurely, and the horror that they were suffering. And so they're looking for a way to fill the parking lot. You know, there's a drive-in. You needed a lot of cars paying a lot of admission. You needed probably more admissions than at a standard theater, because one of the big games for drive-in theaters was trying to find a way to sneak people in. You know, you'd pay for 2 admissions, but you'd have 4 people locked in the trunk. Premature burial, like that. And so what the Ferguson Hills Drive-In did is they put out an advertisement. Actually, it's a want ad that says wanted. man to be buried alive for 3 days without food or water.
For 3 days, okay.
3 days. And so they had this one ad, and then they ran the ads for the movie, you know, come see Ray Milland, Premature Burial, blah, blah, blah. And oh, by the way, come see the guy that we got buried up here. And as it turned out, the police found out that this was going on and decided this was not going to happen in Cincinnati. So they objected on safety considerations that, you know, if something happened, what are you going to do? Bring in a backhoe and dig the guy up, you know, if he's having a heart attack and that sort of thing. And so they decided that this was not going to occur. And so the Ferguson Hills Drive-In sued. And it turns out that Judge Otis Hess, who was working on the common pleas back then in 1960, decided that, you know, if this guy wanted to bury himself, you know, what the hell? You know, it's a free country.
Yeah, there are probably more dangerous ways to spend your afternoon, like in a brewery, where you could get
in a brewery. You know, there's a million ways to die.
Exactly. Get quaff a few, get drunk, and, you know, get destroyed by the gears in your own brewery. It's probably safer to bury yourself alive.
So the reports are fairly they're fairly quiet on some of the questions that you'd want to ask yourself, like, you know, how did the guy poop? You know, that sort of, that was 3 days, right?
I have a lot of questions. First of all,
yeah. So they did end up burying the guy. I never did find out his name. They did end up burying the guy, and he was buried right at the entrance to the drive-in. So the advertising all said there's a free pass to every woman who does not faint, you know, on looking at this guy. And so I guess the idea was bring a lot of women out and see if somebody does faint, whatever. But for 3 days and 3 nights, this guy remained buried, and the cars came in and they showed the movie. And then after 3 days, they dug him up. Now, I heard from, I posted this to a couple of online discussion groups, just seeing if somebody remembered these things. And a guy said, I was there when they dug him up. You know, they dug up the guy, and he went nuts. Apparently they get him out of the hole, and he started running around and climbed up to the roof of the refreshment stand at the drive-in and started yelling and screaming and jumping up and down, and had to be carried away, is the way this guy remembers it.
Wow.
But that was apparently the beginning of burying people alive as a publicity stunt
just for the marketing. Wow.
Yeah. Now, 2 years later, the Highway 28 drive-in, which is on the other side of Milford, showed the same movie, and their advertising says something like, you know, see the guy buried alive. But they didn't go into the same level of detail that Ferguson Hills did. So I have no idea how long that guy was buried or that sort of thing.
I mean, I feel like for the marketing, for the publicity stunt, you could have done that, but then had like a separate area that he would have been able to, like, you know, get out, like on the other side of a hill or something, and then come back in the next morning, like, look at me, I'm still buried alive.
The indications are that these folks actually did spend their time in their confined spaces, because even though the drive-in wasn't open all the time, you could get in and see the guy 24 hours a day, you know. So
okay, gotcha.
There was proof that he was.
So he couldn't just like put a sign up in the coffin and just be like, back in 5 minutes. Gotta go poop.
Yeah. No, this was it's apparently he had a lot of whatever backed up when he was brought out and kind of ran
3 days. I can imagine.
Right. So at the same time, there were burials before the 1960s, but they tended to be magic tricks.
Okay.
Houdini did a premature burial trick in which it was in fact Mrs. Houdini who was the one who was put into a coffin and then buried, and she had to escape as part of the show. And so in the time period that these examples I'm describing for you took place, there was one of these magic burials that took place in Madison Place. There was a nightclub in Cincinnati. It was run by two brothers named Headleston. And the Headlestons had a nightclub on Plainfield Road, just outside of Marymount, called the Mystery Lounge. And the Mystery Lounge, a lot of the nightclubs around had music for dancing and that sort of thing. Well, at the Mystery Lounge, the entertainment was magic. And so they would bring in magicians and they would perform magic tricks and that sort of thing. And so one of the brothers who ran the Mystery Lounge had in fact recently escaped from a straitjacket while suspended 50 or 60 feet in the air on a crane. And they announced that he was going to escape from a coffin that was going to be buried in the parking lot of the Albers supermarket across Plainfield Road from the Mystery Lounge. So you got a guy buried in a coffin for the premature burial. And I guess they decided that was kind of a vanilla sort of buried alive thing. And that if we're going to get people to come see him again or something like that again, we need to add some spice.
Yeah, you got to up the ante. Got to do something better with the sequel.
And so the solution was to bury somebody with a bunch of snakes, including poisonous snakes. And so the next logical step. The next logical step. The next situation came in 1963 at the Western Hills Plaza. And this was the incident that I remember. I was about 11 or 12 at the time. And they had a guy who was billed as Ahab the Arab. And this was back when Ray Stevens' novelty tune, Ahab the Arab, was still on the charts.
Okay.
And so this was a term people would have known at the time. And again, the police intervened. They announced Ahab the Arab was going to be buried in a coffin with a bunch of snakes in the parking lot at the Western Hills Plaza. And the police said, no, you can't do that because he does not have a performance license. And this is a performance. And so it went into court, and Simon Lease Sr., so this is the father of the guy who later became the prosecutor during the Mapplethorpe controversy and the Hustler controversy and that sort of thing. His father was on the court and ruled, the guy can go ahead and get buried. If he wants to get buried, let him get buried. Now, it turns out that because of that court case, we know who Ahab was. Ahab was not, in fact, an Arab, as he was billed. Ahab was a guy named Jerry Shinners, and he was 23 years old and grew up way down in Kentucky, right at the Kentucky-Tennessee border. And this is significant because there were lots of burials with snakes all over the United States, and they were almost all coordinated by a guy named Larry Nunn, who was based in Glasgow, Kentucky, which is down there right at the Kentucky-Tennessee border. Larry would had a huge collection of snakes. He just loved snakes. He was never the guy in the coffin. He would advertise for people to perform this thing, and he'd have to find somebody who liked snakes as much as he did. And I guess Jerry Shinners was one of them. It turns out that over the years, Larry Nunn, the Snake Man, had lots of partners. One of them was a guy known only as Pancho, and Pancho did not perform as Ahab the Arab. He performed as an Indian chief named Wachikanoka.
Okay.
And so depending on who was being buried and depending on where it was in Larry Nunn's cycle, you might see Jerry Shinners, you might see Pancho, you might see somebody else.
I mean, Larry, this sounds like a Snake King situation.
Yeah.
We might have a Tiger King. This is a Snake King.
Snake King, exactly.
He had his own Snake Kingdom, and he was just going off and
that's exactly it. Because
Netflix on the horn. We have your second season right here.
Right. So Larry Nunn estimated his career doing this, burying people with snakes, ran from about 1950 to about 1970.
Okay.
And he estimated that in that 20-year period, he had sold 3 million tickets at 25 cents a piece.
Wow.
So he bragged that he went up to Minneapolis with Pancho, and they brought in 50,000 people as a promotion for a radio station up there. And when they split the proceeds after paying expenses and that sort of thing, they each got like $5,000. And he says what he found out with his partners is they'd go and spend the money right away. Larry'd put it in the bank, but he'd say, 2 weeks later, Pancho'd be back and saying, "Hey, let's do another gig. I'm broke." But so they at the Western Hills Plaza, they let Jerry Shinners go into his coffin.
Yeah.
And what he brought with him, and this came out in the court testimony, was 2 rattlesnakes, a couple of water moccasins, a handful of copperheads. So we're looking at somewhere near 7 to 10 actual poisonous snakes.
Right.
But then just to fill out the coffin, he had 2 boa constrictors, some bull snakes, and some indigo snakes, which look very fierce, but they're quite harmless. And so,
if that boa goes around your neck, that's still a snake.
So there's probably 20 snakes.
Yeah.
In this box, and they're calling it a coffin. But it was really 6.5 feet long and 3.5 feet wide and 3 feet deep. So he wasn't quite confined into a coffin space. There was a little bit.
I'm 6'3". They would have had to make a bigger coffin for me.
Yeah. So yeah, this is what you would do, and as I said, I was there. I still can't remember that or believe that my father brought an 11-year-old kid up to the shopping center and paid a quarter for me to go in this tent and take a look down at this guy crawling with the snakes all over him. But that's incredible. What you would do. It was out in the middle of the parking lot under like a circus tent.
Yeah.
You'd pay your fee, go in, walk up a little ramp and look down into this tube and see this guy in there.
So you just saw like his face with like snakes going around him.
The way the viewing tube was set up, is you could kind of see the full length of the coffin.
Oh, okay.
So it had like 3 windows in it. So there was a window for his head area, a window for the midriff, and then a window down by his feet. And so you could kind of see where the snakes were, and you could see that he always had some up by his head.
Wow.
And that kind of thing. So this Larry Nunn is amazing. Your description of him as the Snake King is very apropos, because he had what appears to have been like one of these roadside zoos. You know, the Tiger King was like this roadside zoo with the tigers. Yeah. And if you drove through Glasgow, Kentucky, you could pull off to Larry Nunn's snake kingdom, whatever he called it, and actually see some of his snakes when he wasn't on the road with one of these burial things. Now he died in 1992, so he'd been out of the burial thing for about 20 years when he died, but he's buried in Glasgow, Kentucky, and there's every indication that he was not buried with any snakes.
There you go.
So
there you go. So being buried with all of these poisonous snakes, do you have any reports of like one going wrong, like someone getting bit?
This must have been the strangest business to participate in. There was a news story where Pancho got drunk one night and decided to bring a bunch of snakes back to the bar, and so he drove out to Larry Nunn's place and got into one of the enclosures and picked up 2 handfuls of snakes, drove back to the bar with the snakes in his hand while he's driving, and brought the snakes into the bar, and the people there noticed that he'd been bit like 4 or 5 times, you know, and so he apparently had so much anesthetic that he didn't notice he'd been bit, but claimed not to have any ill effects from being bit by the snakes. There was
interesting.
I've never seen a case where somebody who was buried while they were buried actually got bit, but there were a couple of occasions where, as people were coming out of being buried, they got bit.
Yeah.
And again, nobody seems to have died.
Interesting. So I'm guessing like we have the antidotes for all of these poisonous snake bites, or we had at the time something that could, if they got bit, they would be okay.
Now theoretically, that's true. The thing is, it was never reported, for instance, in the newspapers that, oh, by the way, when they showed up in town, they made sure they had Antivenom at Good Samaritan Hospital, you know. So
that would be the first thing I check. Before I close the coffin, just real quick. You have for all the snakes I got in here, you have all of the antidotes up there, ready to go.
Right.
All right, good.
And then some of the towns where they did this sort of thing, they probably didn't have a very big hospital, you know, and who knows what they had in the emergency.
Wow.
Okay, so we start out with the plain vanilla guy getting buried.
Yeah, I was gonna say this makes that guy who was just buried for 3 days with no snakes and came out crazy. That makes his story look even worse, because at first it's like, oh wow, buried alive, that's terrible. Of course you would go crazy, and then you got the guys buried with snakes, and they presumably did not go crazy when they came out.
And the interesting thing about them, I haven't mentioned this yet. These guys with the snakes, they would stay down there as long as the gig lasted. So in some cases, they were underground for 3 weeks.
What?
One
throwing food in the pipe?
Yeah, I have one of them. I found a news story and it said, the last time he was buried for 32 days, and he's going to try to break that record this time. So,
well, there you go. Over a month.
These guys
buried alive.
These guys were buried for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so now you've got people buried with snakes, and so if you're going to ramp up the game, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And it looks like there were 3 things they could have done, and they did them all at once.
Okay.
Number 1, bury somebody in ice.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. Number 2, the person you bury in ice is a woman.
Ah, there you go.
Number 3, the person you bury in ice is a woman in a bikini.
Ah, the next logical step. You did
the next logical step. And so that's what they did.
Yeah.
And this exact situation took place in 1969 on Glenway Avenue in Bridgetown at the Tom Kinnear Dodge dealership.
Okay.
At the corner of Glenway and Childs Lane. Big used car lot down there.
Yeah.
They brought a woman in her bikini, and they brought all this ice. Now, the women on ice was run by a company out of Toledo.
Okay.
And it looks like this company only provided women to be frozen underground for a couple of years, but in the course of it, there were 3 or 4 different women, and I've never been able to determine precisely which one of the models showed up in Cincinnati, but they were always accompanied by a doctor. And the gimmick was the doctor, who, as far as I can tell, was just some guy from the ad agency in Toledo, would hypnotize the young woman to slow down her bodily functions.
Gotcha.
and to render her suggestively immune to the effects of cold. And so
smart.
So he would hypnotize her, and then she would go into this ice coffin, and she would lie there for about 2 or 3 days. Actually, I think with the women, it was always 2 days, 48 hours.
Wow.
You'd get buried on a Thursday night, and you'd be brought out of hypnosis on Saturday. And so we've got the lady, Tom Kinnear Dodge, in her bikini. Now, it turns out that this was in 1969. In 1968, there was a riot in Asbury Park, New Jersey, about a woman being buried in ice, undoubtedly from the same company in Toledo. They announced it was a promotion for a mobile home concern, that they were going to bury this woman in ice. And for whatever reason, the woman was late in arriving, but there were 10,000 people packing the parking lot to see her be put in ice.
Wow.
And they were so upset that it was going on late that the doctor said, "I'm going to need quiet to hypnotize her. You know, you're making too much noise." And so he took her inside the truck to hypnotize her. And apparently people thought that he was trying to get away and she wasn't going to be put on exhibit. So they started rocking the truck. And so they had to call police in to break up this mob. And they finally got her in the ground, you know. But apparently there was a stampede trying to get in. It was kind of like the Who concert.
I was wondering, because the police have come in trying to stop every single one of these burials every time. Did they try to stop the woman?
They did not try to stop the Tom Kinnear Dodge thing. Now that used car lot would have been outside the city limits. And so it could be that the Green Township constables were a little bit more forgiving about these things than the city of Cincinnati police.
They still came on the scene just after to bring the riot.
Right. But yeah, there was this riot in New Jersey. Now the newspaper stories about these doctors are so weird. The one in Cincinnati, the name that they gave was Forrest G Parker. Dr. Forrest G Parker accompanied this nubile young woman who was going to be buried in 5,000 pounds of ice. And it says that he's a scientist who has been studying the effects of hypnosis on our ability to withstand hot and cold. And he's decided, and it says this in the newspaper article, to share his findings with the public. See, now, most of the scientists I know who want to share their findings with the public put a paper in like a peer-reviewed scientific journal. Now, apparently, Forrest G. Parker decided that the medium of Dodge dealerships was preferable to publishing it in a scientific journal or something.
Of course.
But I've never seen the reports of his work. Just just lovely women emerging from icy tombs in leopard print bikinis.
Yeah, so 5,000 pounds of ice.
5,000 pounds of ice, yes.
And they were in like completely engulfed in it.
Yes. So these would have been 5 or 6 rectangular blocks of ice. And so she's lying on one, and then the sides, and then a roof, and then caps on either end. And apparently the total weight of these was alleged to have been 5,000 pounds. And here again, she's there for the duration. It looks like the people in Cincinnati were very well behaved, but a South Carolina appearance just a couple of months before Cincinnati, the frozen lady, she was buried with a telephone, and she called out in the middle of the night and said, there's some real idiots out here. And basically they were pounding on the ice.
Do not tap on the ice.
Do not tap on the ice. That sort of thing.
Wow. So they never froze snakes in the ice. So as it melted, the snakes would be able to come in.
Right.
That's level 4. That's level 4. If we wanted to update up the ante again, you could have frozen snakes into the ice that would melt out.
And then it just stops. You can find these reports up from 1960 to 1969, and then it just stops. There are very rare returns after this, like in the 70s and 80s, where it sounds like somebody's trying to revive some aspect of this, but it just never caught on again. It was in an artifact of the 60s.
Interesting. Yeah, I know David Blaine did something that was kind of buried alive, or just like not having oxygen for like an hour or something. Right. But yeah, I can't think of anything more recently. Maybe. And
that's exactly the distinction, because it is understood in these particular cases, just getting buried with snakes or buried in ice, that it's not up to you to get out. You have to be rescued. That you're a prisoner, and you're a prisoner as long as the person who put you in the ground put you in the ground. Whereas with magicians, it's a characteristic that at a certain point, they're going to get back to oxygen, or they're going to get out of the coffin.
If you're trapped in there, it's just kind of survival mode while people just kind of gawk at you.
So it becomes in its own way, without this expectation that the person can get out. it actually becomes kind of a very sadistic thing, you know, that you're paying your quarter to watch somebody who's actually a prisoner.
Yeah.
You know,
who could not get out if they wanted to.
Yeah.
What do you think? What if that was offered today for a lump sum? You basically you would get buried alive. People would come and look at you. Like, how much would that have to be for you to do that?
It's one of those things. I think the reason it died out, is because we didn't have the technology to monetize it. If you offered that situation now, I think you'd find a whole bunch of TikTok influencers who would say, "Sign me up."
Yep, I will. Oh, live TikTok. They're burial alive.
I will have my TikTok reports with all of my friendly snakes. You know, so I think now that we have this this sort of technology where you're carrying the freak show in your back pocket.
Yeah.
That we might have people very interested in doing something like this.
Yeah, you could bring that back, and you could just have like little GoPros like all around, and just live stream it for 32 days.
The people have gotten dumber. I think the snakes have gotten smarter. The snakes would probably go on strike. Nah, my guy's got BO.
I would be rooting for the snakes after a certain number of days. Just come on, just right there, right in the arm.
Don't put me in there with this guy.
Oh, that's great. Buried alive. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's going to be coming back. I don't know. I don't know if dealerships in Cincinnati are going to start trying to sell cars by doing any of that buried alive. Wow, that is a fantastic story. Thank you to Greg Hand for coming back on the 3 a.m. Coney, episode number 4. We had talked about the 1,000 ways to die in the brewery, grave robbers and body snatchers, and the champion beer drinkers of Cincinnati. And coming up, we have UFOs and the Dime Museum, the freak show. Those will be good ones. If you want to follow Greg off of this, just Google Cincinnati Curiosities. He is the proprietor of all, that's a hard word that I don't say every day, proprietor of all things old and Cincinnati. So give him a follow and tune in a few more weeks for the next episode. Thank you for coming on, Greg.
You got it. See you next time.